Clara Evans had stayed far too long at her desk that night. The office was supposed to close at 7, but deadlines and an avalanche of small tasks kept her glued to the glowing monitor long past when anyone else had left. At 11:47 p.m., the entire floor was silent and deserted, the hum of fluorescent lights, the only companion to her tired heartbeat. Papers were scattered across her cubicle, coffee cups stood like weary soldiers in defeat, and the city stretched below the high glass windows like a restless sea of lights. Clara rubbed her aching eyes and promised herself she would leave once she hit save on the final report. She had always been the dependable one, the assistant who never left before the boss, the one who made sure everything was finished even when no one noticed. That dependability came at a cost. Loneliness clung to her life like a second skin. Her phone had not buzzed all evening, not one message from friends, not even a reminder from her landlord. Clara kept telling herself this grind was temporary, that someday she would climb out of the assistant role into something with more influence. For now she was surviving paying rent on a shoebox apartment and fighting off the weight of student loans. She stretched her arms, leaned back, and was about to shut down her computer when the shrill ring of the office landline cut through the silence. Clara flinched hard. Nobody used that phone anymore. Most communication was through email or mobile. She glanced at the glowing clock on her monitor. 11:47 p.m. Who could be calling at such an hour? Her pulse quickened as the phone rang a second time. She thought about letting it ring out, but curiosity pulled her trembling hand to the receiver. "Hello, this is Clara Evans," she whispered, her voice, instinctively hushed, as though she might wake the building. The silence on the other end stretched too long. Then a voice spoke. It was low, smooth, and commanding, the kind of voice that expected obedience. "Where is the file?" Clara's chest tightened. She blinked at her desk at the random folders and sticky notes, bewildered. "I am sorry, you must have the wrong number. This is an office line." The voice did not soften. "Do not play games with me. Where is the file?" A chill sliced down her spine. It was not a question, it was an order. Clara clutched the receiver tighter. "I think you have the wrong person. I do not know what you are talking about." The line went quiet again, but when the voice returned, it carried an edge that made her throat go dry. "Clara Evans." He spoke her name with absolute certainty. She had introduced herself only once at the start of the call. How did he know? Her lips parted, searching for words. "Who is this?" His reply came soft, almost amused. "You will know soon enough. From now on you are mine." And the line went dead. Clara sat frozen with the receiver pressed to her ear, her heart hammering against her ribs. The echo of his words pounded through her head. Mine. Who talks like that to a stranger? And how could he know her name with such assurance? She set the phone down as though it were dangerous. Maybe it was some elaborate prank. Maybe a hacker had accessed employee records. Maybe a coworker thought it would be funny. But no prank had ever chilled her like that. That voice was too calm, too sure. She shut down her computer with shaking fingers, swept her bag off the chair, and hurried through the corridor. Each step echoed against the empty walls. By the time she reached the lobby, her breath was shallow, her ears straining for any sound behind her. She told herself she was being paranoid, that exhaustion was making her jumpy. Yet the certainty in that voice, the ownership threaded through it, would not leave her. On the subway ride home, Clara replayed the call again and again, a file, a man who already knew her name, a command that she belonged to him. She pulled her coat tighter around her, wishing she had not stayed late. The city lights outside the window blurred, and for the first time in years, New York felt less like a home and more like a stage where invisible eyes watched her every move. When she stepped into her apartment, she expected relief, but the silence felt heavy. She filled the kettle, made tea, and tried to steady herself. Bills lay piled on the counter, constant reminders of why she sacrificed her evenings. She had dreamed of more, of a life where she was not invisible, but reality kept her chained to long hours and little recognition. She sat with the tea in her hands and thought again about the voice. It had not slurred like a drunk, nor carried the laughter of a prank. It had been measured deliberate with the tone of someone who was used to control. Whoever he was, he believed he had the right to claim what he wanted. Disturbingly, he had spoken as if she had no choice. Clara forced herself into bed, praying sleep would wash away the memory. Every creak of the building felt like a footstep in the hallway. Every shadow stretching across her wall felt like a presence. Her phone on the nightstand glowed dimly silent but heavy with the memory of that voice. She rolled onto her side and told herself morning would make everything feel less dramatic, that she would laugh about it at work. Yet deep down, she knew the story was not over. The way he had said her name, the weight in his final words, had carved themselves into her bones. Something had shifted tonight, something irreversible. Clara could not know that the man behind the voice was already watching, already setting pieces into place. She only knew she felt marked, claimed by a stranger who spoke with the certainty of a man who always got what he wanted. Clara Evans woke the next morning, still unsettled by the phone call from the previous night. She moved through her routine with the autopilot of someone forcing herself to function, brewing coffee too strong, pulling her hair into a messy knot, and catching the subway with barely a minute to spare. Her mind kept circling back to the voice, the command, the way he had known her name. She told herself she would forget about it, that it had to be some kind of wrong number, maybe even a scammer with access to public records. By the time she stepped into the office lobby, she had almost convinced herself of that. Almost. The illusion cracked the moment she walked through the doors of her company's open plan office. A crowd had gathered around the reception desk, voices buzzing with gossip. Clara slowed, wondering what all the fuss was about until she saw it. A towering arrangement of red roses and white orchids dominated the counter, elegant, extravagant, impossible to ignore. The scent wafted through the air, thick and heady, silencing even the most skeptical whispers. Clara felt every eye turn toward her as the receptionist spotted her and beamed. "Clara, these are for you." Her heart sank. "For me? That has to be a mistake." But the receptionist shook her head, holding out a sleek envelope tucked into the flowers. Clara accepted it with trembling fingers. The card was heavy, embossed with only 2 letters in a confident hand. DB Clara's chest tightened as she read the note inside. "Wrong numbers are rarely accidents. Looking forward to meeting you properly. Damien Blackwell." She froze. The name was familiar, not because she knew him personally, but because it had been plastered across every business headline for the past 6 months. Damien Blackwell, the billionaire CEO of Blackwell Enterprises. A man both envied and reviled, depending on who you asked. He was the subject of relentless media attention, his every move dissected by analysts and gossip columnists alike. Just last week, the New York Times had run a front-page story suggesting Blackwell Enterprises had manipulated stock prices, prompting regulatory investigations. The tabloids painted him as a ruthless playboy who moved through models and socialites like seasonal accessories. He was power money scandal and influence wrapped in one enigmatic figure. And now he was sending flowers to her office. Clara felt heat rising to her cheeks as she sensed her coworkers staring. Snickers rippled through the crowd. One voice muttered not quietly enough, "Guess our quiet assistant has a secret billionaire boyfriend." Another chimed in, "Or sugar daddy." Clara clenched her fists. She wanted to protest. To explain this had to be a mistake. But the smirks and raised eyebrows told her it would sound like denial. She hurried away, clutching the card, her heels clicking too loudly against the polished floor. In her cubicle, she shoved the flowers under the desk, but the perfume still clung to the air, a reminder she could not escape. Curiosity gnawed at her. She opened her laptop and typed Damien Blackwell into the search bar. Hundreds of results appeared instantly. Photographs of him at galas stepping out of limousines, giving speeches at investor conferences. In every shot, he was immaculate, tailored suits, fitting like armor. His dark hair artfully disheveled, his jawline sharp, as though carved for magazine covers. But behind the perfection was something else, an intensity in his eyes that made Clara's stomach tighten. Articles detailed his business empire, real estate, tech startups, global shipping. Others highlighted lawsuits, accusations of insider trading, whispers of secret settlements. Yet there were also stories of philanthropy donations to children's hospitals, scholarships in his parents' names. He was a contradiction admired and feared in equal measure. Clara closed the browser quickly, afraid someone would catch her looking. Her hands shook as she thought of the call. The voice had been low, commanding, impossible to ignore. Could it really have been him? But why would a man like Damien Blackwell call an ordinary assistant in the middle of the night? And how did he know her name? By mid-afternoon, the office had grown unbearable. Whispers followed her everywhere. Colleagues who usually ignored her now watched her openly. Even her manager, a sharp-eyed woman named Monica, raised an eyebrow when she passed. "Clara, if you are going to have powerful friends, try not to let it distract the rest of the team," she said coolly. Clara bit back the urge to protest. What could she say? That she had answered a phone call by mistake, and now a billionaire thought she belonged to him. It sounded insane, even in her head. She buried herself in work, but the words on the screen blurred as her mind replayed the card. "Looking forward to meeting you properly." Fear curled inside her chest. What did he mean? How could someone like him decide she was his with no explanation? By the time she left the office, the flowers still sat on the reception desk like a neon sign, a reminder that her world had shifted without her consent. Clara pushed through the revolving doors into the chill night air, clutching her coat tight. She tried to convince herself it would end here, that billionaires had short attention spans, that tomorrow he would move on to some model or heiress. Yet deep down, she sensed that the call and the flowers were only the beginning. Across the street, headlights flickered as a sleek black car idled against the curb windows, tinted too dark to see inside. Clara hesitated, pulse racing, before forcing herself toward the subway entrance. She could feel unseen eyes following her every step. For the first time in her life, Clara Evans realized she was not invisible anymore, and it terrified her. Clara Evans told herself she would go straight home, lock the door, and bury herself under blankets until the memory of those flowers faded, but fate did not cooperate. The night air was sharp, carrying the scent of rain-soaked asphalt as she hurried toward the subway. She kept her eyes down, hoping to melt into the anonymous crowd, but as she neared the station stairs, a limousine slid into her path, sleek and predatory beneath the streetlights. The door opened with mechanical smoothness before she could react. A tall man in a dark suit stepped out, his expression professional yet unyielding. "Miss Evans," he said in a deep voice that left no room for refusal. "Mr. Blackwell requests your time." Clara froze, heart pounding. "I think you have the wrong person." The man's eyes flicked toward the flowers, still clutched in her bag, then back to her. "No mistake, please." It was polite, but there was steel beneath it. People on the sidewalk slowed to watch curiosity sparking in their eyes. Clara hated the attention. Her choices narrowed quickly: climb into the limousine or create a scene she was not prepared to explain. With a shaky breath, she slid inside. The interior was dimly lit, the scent of leather and expensive cologne filling the space. The door closed, sealing her into silence. Opposite her sat Damien Blackwell. He was even more striking in person than in photographs. His hair was slightly tousled, as though by choice, his tailored suit an effortless display of wealth. Yet it was his eyes that trapped her, dark and unwavering, carrying the weight of a man accustomed to command. Clara's throat went dry. "You," she whispered, recognizing the voice immediately. "You called me." Damien tilted his head, a faint smile ghosting his lips. "And you answered." Clara bristled, gripping her bag tightly. "It was a mistake." His gaze sharpened. "Do you believe in mistakes, Clara?" "I do not. Numbers, choices. People they intersect for reasons we may not understand yet." She swallowed hard. "Why me? I do not know anything about your files or whatever you were looking for." He studied her closely, as though cataloging every twitch of her expression. "There's a man," he said slowly, "an insider who was supposed to deliver me something crucial, sensitive data, proof of fraud that could bring down half of Wall Street. He vanished. His number differed from yours by only 1 digit, yet when I called you answered." "Clara Evans' assistant at Weston & Co. You claim ignorance, but coincidences like this are rare." Clara shook her head fiercely. "I swear I have nothing to do with any of this. I am just an assistant trying to pay rent." He leaned forward slightly, the dim light catching the sharp angles of his face. "Perhaps, but until I know for certain you are vulnerable, that makes you my responsibility." She recoiled at the certainty in his tone. "I never asked for your protection." "Protection is not requested," he replied calmly. "It is ensured." The limousine pulled to a stop at a rooftop bar overlooking the glittering city skyline. The driver opened the door, and Clara hesitated, her pulse thundering. Damien extended a hand. She ignored it and climbed out on her own, determined not to appear pliant. The rooftop was quiet at this hour, private tables shielded by glass walls from the wind. Soft jazz drifted from hidden speakers. Damien guided her to a secluded corner with a view of Manhattan, spread like a jeweled map beneath them. A waiter appeared instantly, with 2 glasses of wine as though rehearsed. Clara's unease deepened. "You planned this." Damien raised his glass slightly. "I plan everything." She refused to touch hers. "Why me?" She pressed again. desperation leaking into her voice. He set his glass down, untouched his gaze, never leaving hers. Because if you truly are uninvolved, then you are in danger simply by answering that call. Men will assume you know something. They will look for you, and they will not be as courteous as I am. Clara hugged her arms around herself, shivering despite the heated lamps. You are saying strangers might come after me for something I have nothing to do with. Damien's expression softened almost imperceptibly. That is exactly what I am saying, which is why from this moment you are under my protection. I will not let them touch you. She stared at him, anger and fear twisting together. You cannot just decide that. I have a life, I have work. You are not my, she faltered, recalling his words on the phone. You are not my anything. His eyes glinted. Not yet. Silence stretched between them, charged and suffocating. Clara looked away, out at the glittering skyline, wishing she could disappear into the anonymity of 1,000 windows. But the weight of Damien's presence anchored her. He exuded control, danger, and something else she could not name, an allure that both frightened and pulled at her. Finally she whispered, "What if I refuse?" Damien leaned back, his lips curving faintly. "Then you gamble with your safety, and I do not gamble with what is mine." The word mine reverberated again, a brand she could not scrub from her skin. Clara's chest tightened. She wanted to run, to break free of this surreal encounter, but a darker part of her recognized the truth in his warning. If powerful men were involved, she would not survive alone. Damien lifted his glass once more, his voice almost gentle now. "Drink, Clara. Tonight is the beginning of something neither of us expected, but sometimes fate calls when you least want to answer." She shook her head, holding her ground, though her hands trembled in her lap. She had walked into a trap disguised as chivalry, and yet in the depths of her fear, a dangerous curiosity bloomed. Who was this man who could bend reality with his presence? And why did a part of her already feel caught in his orbit? The following week unfolded like a dream Clara Evans could not wake from. The morning after her rooftop encounter with Damien Blackwell, a sleek black sedan waited outside her apartment building. At first she thought it belonged to a neighbor, but when she stepped out, the driver opened the door and said, "Miss Evans, Mr. Blackwell asked me to take you to work." Clara froze on the sidewalk. "No, thank you. I can take the subway." The man did not argue, simply waited with an expression that revealed nothing. Commuters glanced at the scene with curiosity. Heat climbed Clara's neck. Rather than create a spectacle, she slid into the back seat, fuming silently as the sedan glided through traffic. By the time she reached the office, her coworkers were already whispering. The receptionist smirked as she passed, and 2 analysts whispered loudly enough for her to hear. "Our Clara has upgraded. Chauffeur service now." Her cheeks burned. She kept her head down and buried herself in spreadsheets, but the stares and giggles were relentless. It only worsened when another delivery arrived. At noon, a box wrapped in black satin containing the newest laptop model, a platinum credit card, and a watch that gleamed with quiet opulence. The note inside bore Damien's initials. "I take care of what is mine." Clara shoved the gifts back into the box, horrified. When Monica, her manager, strolled by and noticed the box, her sharp eyes narrowed. "Quite the benefactor you have. Make sure your personal life doesn't interfere with your work, Clara." Clara wanted to scream that it was not her personal life, that this was an invasion she had not chosen, but she stayed silent, too aware of the poisonous gossip swirling. By the end of the day, she was suffocating. When she exited the building, the same black sedan idled at the curb. She almost turned away, but a tall man stepped out and blocked her path. He was not the driver, it was Damien himself. Dressed in a tailored gray suit, he looked like he had stepped from the pages of a magazine, his presence commanding attention from everyone nearby. Conversations on the sidewalk faltered. Phones discreetly lifted for photos. Clara's stomach dropped. "You cannot keep doing this," she hissed when he approached. "You are embarrassing me. Everyone thinks I am." She cut herself off, too humiliated to say the words. Damien's gaze flicked over the crowd of onlookers, then back to her. He stepped close, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "They think whatever entertains them for the moment. But you know the truth. You are under my protection. Let them assume what they like." She glared at him, her pulse racing. "I do not want your protection, and I do not want your gifts." He studied her, then said simply, "Refuse them if you wish. I do not give because I expect gratitude. I give because it is who I am. You will learn that." Before she could answer, a voice cut in sharply. "Clara." She turned to see Monica approaching, face tight with irritation. "A word, please." Clara's blood chilled. Monica never used that tone in public. She followed her boss a few steps away, aware of Damien's eyes still fixed on her. "I do not know what game you are playing," Monica said in a low hiss, "but you need to be careful. Men like Damien Blackwell do not orbit around assistants unless something is going on. If HR catches wind, if this ends up in the press, your career here is finished." Clara's stomach dropped. "It is not what it looks like." Monica gave a thin smile. "It never is. But appearances are everything in this business. Be smart." She walked off, leaving Clara trembling. Damien had not moved. He gestured toward the car. "Come with me. You look like you need air." Against her better judgment, Clara found herself sliding into the limousine again. The moment the door closed, silence enveloped her. She turned on him instantly. "Do you see what you are doing? Everyone thinks I am sleeping with you for promotions. My boss practically threatened me." Damien leaned back, unruffled. "And yet, when your boss tried to humiliate you in front of the team last week, who stepped in and made sure you kept your dignity?" Clara blinked, remembering. Monica had scolded her publicly over a missed deadline, and Damien, who had apparently been visiting the office, had redirected the conversation with smooth authority, pointing out that Clara had been the one holding the department together. Clara had flushed with both gratitude and anger at the time. Now his words hit their mark. "That is different," she muttered. He shook his head slowly. "It is the same. I take care of what is mine, Clara. Not just with gifts, with loyalty, with protection." She clenched her fists. "I am not yours." His eyes darkened, a storm contained. "You already are. You just do not realize it yet." Her breath caught at the intensity in his tone. She turned away, staring out the tinted glass, furious at herself for the heat rising in her chest. The ride stretched on in silence until Damien spoke again, softer this time. "You do not have to like it. You do not even have to understand it yet. But the world we are standing in is not safe. Men are watching you, men who believe you know something you do not. I will not let them touch you. That is the only truth you need to accept tonight." Clara hugged her arms around herself, torn between outrage and the unsettling flicker of safety she felt in his presence. She wanted to fight him, to deny every word, but another part of her buried deep wondered what it would feel like to stop resisting, to lean into the certainty he exuded. When the car finally stopped outside her apartment, she bolted out without looking back. Yet as she climbed the steps to her door, she knew he was still in her orbit, a force she could neither control nor escape. And as much as she hated it, a part of her did not want to. The days that followed blurred into a strange rhythm Clara Evans could not quite process. Each morning the black sedan waited, and each evening Damien Blackwell's shadow stretched into her life whether she wanted it or not. She kept telling herself she would put an end to it, that she would tell him firmly to stop, but each time she stood before him, the words stuck like stones in her throat. His presence was overwhelming his calm confidence, like a tide she could not resist. One evening after work, he appeared not with the usual entourage or chauffeur, but alone waiting outside the office as the autumn wind whipped through the streets. He gestured for her to walk with him, and despite herself, she obeyed. They ended up at a quiet cafe, far from the corporate glare. For the first time, Damien seemed stripped of his armor. No photographers, no investors, no polished facade, just a man sitting across from her with a steaming cup of coffee. Clara studied him carefully, searching for cracks in the persona. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally. "You barely know me yet. You act like I belong to you. You do not even know who I am." His gaze did not waver. "I know enough. I know you work late into the night without anyone noticing. I know you keep your head down because you believe invisibility is safety. And I know the world just shifted under your feet, and you are not ready to admit it." Clara's heart stuttered. "That is not knowing me. That is guessing." He leaned forward slightly. "Then tell me if I am wrong." She opened her mouth to deny it, but closed it again, unsettled by how easily he read her. To her surprise, Damien did not press further. Instead, his expression softened, and for the first time he told her something about himself. "My parents died when I was 12, he said quietly. "A scandal destroyed their lives, the press tore them apart, and when the smoke cleared, I was left with a legacy of shadows. Since then I have lived under the constant weight of eyes watching me, waiting for me to fall. You may think I live in control, but the truth is I fight every day to keep the empire intact, to survive the vultures circling overhead." Clara blinked. She had never imagined him vulnerable. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, voice low. He studied her with an intensity that made her shiver. "Because if you are going to despise me, at least despise the truth, not the mask." His words lingered with her long after she returned home. That night, Clara could not sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying his tone, the flicker of pain he had allowed her to glimpse. Against her will, a part of her began to see him differently, not just as the billionaire who had invaded her life, but as a man carrying scars. Yet suspicion gnawed at her. His talk of files and insiders haunted her. Why was she dragged into this at all? She began digging through her father's old boxes, dusty cartons stacked in the corner of her small apartment. He had died years ago, a car accident on a rainy night, but Clara had never shaken the feeling that something about it did not add up. Her mother rarely spoke of it, brushing away questions with tired eyes. Clara pulled out old pay stubs and bank statements, flipping through with growing unease. Her father had worked for a small accounting firm, yet one document bore the faint watermark, of a company she recognized from Damien's accusations, a corporation frequently accused of shady practices. Her pulse quickened. Could her father have been tied, however loosely, to the same network Damien was fighting? She slammed the box shut, shaken. The next day she confronted Damien. They met again in his limousine, the city lights painting shadows across his face. "Did you know," she demanded, "that my father worked for one of those companies you are investigating? Did you target me because of that?" Damien's eyes darkened, but he did not look surprised. "I suspected," he admitted. "That is why I cannot dismiss you as coincidence." Clara, you may hold a thread without even realizing it, a thread that could unravel everything. Her breath caught. "My father's death was an accident." Damien held her gaze with unsettling calm. Perhaps it was convenient for men who feared what he knew. Clara's chest tightened until she could barely breathe. "Do not say that. Do not rewrite my memories." Damien's voice softened. "I am not rewriting. I am asking you to consider that the world is darker than you have allowed yourself to believe." Tears burned her eyes, but she blinked them back, unwilling to let him see her break. He reached across the seat, his hand hovering as though to comfort, then pulling back at the last second. "I will help you find the truth," he said, "no matter what it costs." Clara turned away, staring out the window at the blur of neon signs and strangers rushing past. She wanted to hate him, to shut the door on his world entirely. But the unease that had lived in her since her father's death stirred again, whispering that Damien's suspicions might not be wrong. As the car carried her home, Clara's mind spun between fear, anger, and the fragile seed of something far more dangerous: hope that the truth, however painful, might finally be within reach. Clara Evans tried to convince herself she could cut Damien Blackwell out of her life, that she could block his number, refuse his cars, and ignore the weight of his presence. But reality did not bend so easily. His world had already bled into hers, staining her days with whispers and her nights with restless dreams. It all came to a head one Friday evening when she stormed out of the office after another round of coworkers' speculation. She had heard them laughing in the break room, asking if she was climbing the corporate ladder on her back. Shame and fury boiled inside her as she hurried down the street, only to find Damien waiting by the curb. He straightened when he saw her, his expression unreadable. "Clara," he began, but she cut him off, her voice trembling with rage. "I am not yours. I am not some possession you can flaunt. I never asked for this, and I do not want it." Passers-by slowed to glance at the scene, their curiosity stinging like salt in her wounds. Damien held her gaze calm in the face of her storm. "You already are mine, Clara. You just do not see it yet." The certainty in his tone infuriated her further. She turned on her heel, intent on leaving. But that was when the paparazzi descended. Flashes burst in her eyes as cameras clicked, questions shouted over one another. "Clara, how long have you been with Damien Blackwell? Did he buy you those shoes? Are you trading favors for promotions?" Someone shoved a microphone near her face. Another shouted, "Sleeping with the billionaire for advancement." Clara froze, panic clawing up her throat. Her entire body trembled as humiliation washed over her. Before she could collapse under the weight of it, a firm hand settled on her shoulder. Damien stepped in front of her, blocking the cameras with his tall frame. His voice cut through the chaos, cool and commanding. "Back off." The reporters faltered at the steel in his tone, but the cameras did not stop. Damien shrugged off his jacket and draped it over Clara's shoulders, shielding her from the flashes. "Come," he said quietly, guiding her toward the waiting car. Clara, too shaken to resist, let him lead her. Inside the limousine, the chaos muffled into silence, broken only by her ragged breaths. She pressed her hands to her face, wishing she could disappear. Damien sat across from her, his eyes steady, his presence grounding. "Breathe, Clara. They thrive on your fear. Do not give it to them." She lowered her hands, glaring at him through a blur of tears. "This is your fault. If you had stayed away, they would not even know my name." He did not deny it. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice softer now. "You are right. I put you in their spotlight, and I will take you out of it. But until then, lean on me. Let me carry the weight." His words disarmed her, loosening the tight knot in her chest. She hated that part of her, wanted to believe him. The car rolled through the city lights, flashing across his face. Clara shifted exhausted, and for the first time allowed herself to rest against the leather seat. Her head tilted almost unconsciously until it brushed against his shoulder. Damien stilled, then let out a slow breath. His heartbeat was steady beneath the fine fabric of his shirt, and against all reason the rhythm soothed her. For a few minutes, the chaos of the world receded, yet even in that fragile calm, Clara's mind wrestled with itself. She could not afford to fall for him. He was power, scandal, danger, and yet, in this stolen silence, he was also warmth, protection, and a strange kind of peace. The car pulled up outside her apartment, but Clara did not move immediately. Damien's hand lifted slightly, as though he wanted to touch her cheek, but he stopped himself. His restraint unsettled her more than any bold gesture could have. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "you may hate me for saying it, but you are already in this. The question is whether you will face it alone or with me." She pulled away, anger flaring again to mask the vulnerability. "I never asked for any of this. Do not confuse my fear with consent." She opened the door and stepped into the night, his jacket still draped over her shoulders. Damien watched her go, his eyes shadowed with something she could not name. Clara walked upstairs, with trembling legs, her heart torn between fury and an ache she did not want to admit was longing. She slammed her apartment door behind her, but even within those walls, she felt his presence lingering like the echo of a storm. She could neither escape nor deny. The following Sunday afternoon, Clara Evans found herself digging through the same boxes of her father's belongings she had once shoved into a corner of her tiny apartment. The confrontation with Damien and the humiliating ambush of paparazzi had left her restless, and her anger was slowly being replaced by something more dangerous questions. She pulled out faded folders, handwritten notes, and brittle receipts, searching for anything that might connect her father to the storm now circling her life. At the bottom of one box, she discovered an envelope addressed to her but never opened. Her hands shook as she tore it open and unfolded a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was her father's. He had written it months before his death. The words were cryptic but chilling. "If something happens to me, trust only the name Blackwell. He knows the truth." Clara sat frozen, the letter trembling between her fingers. Blackwell, Damien. She tried to convince herself it could not be the same man, that her father must have meant someone else. But deep down, she knew better. She felt the floor tilt beneath her as realization sank in. Her father had been caught in the same web Damien was now trying to unravel. That night, Clara confronted him again. Damien invited her into his penthouse, a place so luxurious it felt more like a fortress than a home. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glittering Manhattan skyline, and art worth more than her lifetime earnings hung on the walls. Yet Clara's focus was on the man standing before her, his expression calm, but his eyes flickering with something darker. She thrust the letter toward him. "Did you know about this? Did you know my father was involved?" Damien took the paper, his gaze scanning the words. For a moment, something raw passed across his features before he composed himself. "I suspected," he admitted quietly. "Your father worked as an accountant. He came across irregularities that pointed to one of my rivals. He was brave enough to try to speak out, but he was silenced before he could testify." Clara's breath caught. "Silenced? You mean his accident?" Damien's jaw tightened. It may not have been an accident. Her knees went weak, and she sank onto the edge of a leather sofa. "Why did no one tell me? Why didn't anyone investigate?" Damien sat across from her, leaning forward. "Because the men responsible had the resources to bury the truth. They buried him to protect themselves. I am trying to finish what he started." Clara's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "You should have told me from the beginning." His voice softened. "Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought it was another lie to pull you into my world?" She hated that he was right. She hated that despite every reason not to trust him, some part of her did. The revelation gnawed at her in the days that followed. At work, she could barely focus the numbers on her screen, blurring as her father's letter replayed in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him sitting at the kitchen table, years ago, smiling at her as he balanced the family's bills. And now that smile was tainted by suspicion, by the possibility that his death had not been fate but a deliberate act. One evening she found herself back in Damien's car, the city rushing by outside. She stared out the window, her reflection fractured by streetlights. "I cannot do this," she whispered. "I cannot live with these questions eating me alive." Damien's voice was steady. "Then let me help you find the answers, no matter the cost." She turned to him sharply. "And what will it cost me? My freedom, my reputation, my sanity." His expression softened just for a moment, and she glimpsed the man beneath the billionaire mask. Maybe everything he admitted, but maybe also the truth that has been denied to you for too long. Clara leaned back, her chest tight. She wanted to scream, to demand why fate had chosen her for this torment. Instead, she closed her eyes, feeling the weight of inevitability pressing down. Her life had already been altered beyond recognition. The call, the flowers, the scandal, the paparazzi every step had dragged her closer to a truth her father had died for. She could not turn back now. That night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her phone buzzed with a single text from Damien. "You deserve the truth, and I will help you find it no matter the cost." Clara stared at the words until her vision blurred. For the first time since the nightmare began, she whispered into the darkness, "Then show me." The morning of the Blackwell Enterprises press conference dawned gray and heavy with the promise of rain. Clara Evans arrived not by choice, but because Damien insisted she be there, claiming her presence mattered more than she understood. She stood at the edge of the crowded atrium, surrounded by journalists' cameras and the low hum of anticipation. Damien stood at the podium in a charcoal suit, his expression sharp and composed, though Clara noticed the tension in his jaw. The company had been under fire for weeks, accused of manipulating financial markets, and this was his chance to clear his name. But as he began to speak, the screens behind him flickered. A ripple of static swept through the room, and suddenly words appeared in bold red letters across every screen: fraud. The crowd erupted, cameras, flashing voices shouting. Damien's face hardened as he tried to continue, but hackers had hijacked the feed. New images spilled across the screens, doctored documents, falsified bank transfers, fake audio clips of Damien's voice admitting to crimes. Reporters shouted accusations, their voices a tidal wave. Clara's heart pounded as she watched the carefully controlled event descend into chaos. She saw the fury in Damien's eyes as he raised his voice above the noise. "Lies," he shouted. "This is fabrication. I will prove it." But the crowd was already feeding on blood hungry for scandal. Clara's gaze swept the atrium desperately, and that was when she noticed something strange. At the far corner of the room, a man in a dark coat slipped a USB drive into the hand of another. Her pulse spiked. She knew that movement, that exchange. Without thinking, she reached into her bag where she had tucked away a small box she had found among her father's belongings. Inside was the USB she had almost overlooked, hidden within a pocket of a leather case. She had not dared to examine it fully, afraid of what it might contain. But something told her now was the moment. She pulled it out with trembling fingers. Damien caught sight of her, his eyes widening slightly, as though he understood instantly. Clara pushed through the crowd, ignoring the elbows and shouts until she reached the side of the stage. Security tried to stop her, but Damien waved them aside. She held up the USB with both hands. "This," she whispered urgently. "It was in my father's things. I think this is what they killed him for." Damien's gaze sharpened like a blade. He took the drive and plugged it into the system with swift precision. The screens flickered again, and this time new files appeared, real files. Unaltered evidence, showing that it was not Blackwell Enterprises at fault, but the rival corporation Damien had been fighting all along. Transaction logs, insider testimonies, offshore accounts, data too detailed to be forged. Gasps swept the room as journalists scrambled to capture screenshots, their questions, shifting tone in seconds. Damien's voice cut through strong and clear now. "This is the truth. They tried to bury it. They tried to silence those who carried it. But you cannot silence facts." For a fleeting moment, relief flooded Clara, but it vanished as quickly as it came when she noticed men moving at the edges of the crowd, their focus fixed not on Damien but on her. The rivals' operatives. Her blood ran cold. Before she could react, they lunged. Hands grabbed her arms, dragging her back. Clara cried out, panic surging. Damien leapt from the podium, shoving through the crowd. "Clara," his voice thundered across the atrium. Security scrambled, but the attackers were quick. Clara struggled, her heart slamming against her ribs as they tried to force her toward the exit. Flashes of her father's last moments filled her mind, dark roads, unanswered questions, and she knew this was how they tied up loose ends. But then Damien was there, fury blazing in his eyes. He shoved one man aside, with raw strength, taking a hit to his shoulder as another swung at him. Pain twisted his features, but he did not falter. He wrapped an arm around Clara, pulling her behind him, shielding her with his own body as blows landed. Reporters shouted, cameras captured every second. But in that chaos, all Clara saw was Damien's determination. He would not let her go. She felt him tense as a blade flashed in the crowd. In an instant, he twisted, taking the strike across his side to keep it from her. Clara screamed as blood seeped through his suit, staining her hands when she reached for him. "Damien, no!" He gritted his teeth, his voice rough. "I told you, no one touches you." Security finally swarmed, dragging the attackers away. The room erupted into pandemonium, half the reporters documenting the scandal's unraveling, the other half stunned by the violence. Clara knelt beside Damien, her hands pressed against his wound, her tears blurring everything. "You cannot do this, you cannot leave me too," she whispered desperately. His hand found hers, weak but steady. "I am not leaving, not now, not ever." The words anchored her even as fear consumed her. Sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer. Clara held onto him, the USB safe in his pocket, the truth finally breaking free into the world. But none of it mattered to her in that moment. All that mattered was that he was alive, that he had chosen to bleed for her. And in her heart, something undeniable broke open. No matter how much she had fought it, she loved him. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and quiet dread, but Clara Evans refused to let go of Damien's hand, even as doctors rushed around them. They wheeled him through double doors, her cries trailing after him, but he squeezed her fingers one last time before disappearing inside. Hours stretched like lifetimes in the waiting room, every clock tick scraping against her nerves. News anchors filled the televisions mounted on the wall, their voices urgent. The narrative that had once painted Damien Blackwell as a villain was unraveling in real time. The files Clara had delivered were now public streamed across networks, exposing the rival corporation's corruption. Headlines shifted from Blackwell accused of fraud to Blackwell proves innocence within the span of hours. But none of it mattered to Clara. She sat curled in a chair, Damien's blood still staining her blouse, whispering prayers she had not spoken in years. When the surgeon finally emerged, exhaustion lining his face, Clara jumped to her feet. "He lost a lot of blood, but he is strong. The blade missed vital organs. He will recover." Relief crashed over her like a wave. She staggered forward, clutching the wall to steady herself, tears spilling freely at last. They allowed her into his room once he stabilized. Damien lay pale but alive, monitors beeping steadily, his chest rising and falling with reassuring rhythm. Clara sank into the chair at his bedside, taking his hand in both of hers. For the first time since the call that had started it all, she felt safe. Hours passed before his eyes fluttered open. He blinked slowly, focusing on her face. "Clara," he rasped his voice, rough but sure. She pressed his hand to her lips, her heart aching. "You scared me half to death." His mouth curved faintly despite his weakness. "I told you I would not leave. You believe me now." She shook her head with a trembling laugh. "You are insufferable, even with stitches." His gaze softened, shadows of pain etched into his features. "You saved me. Without you, the truth would still be buried. Without you, I would still be alone in this fight." Clara leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "And without you, I would still be living half a life, angry, invisible, afraid of my father's shadow. You made me face it. You made me see it." He searched her face, as if looking for the part of her that still resisted him. "So what now?" he asked quietly. "You can walk away, go back to your safe routines, your quiet anonymity, or you can stay and rewrite the future with me." Clara's throat tightened. She thought of her father's letter, of his warning to trust only Blackwell. She thought of the way Damien had shielded her, bled for her, and given her the one thing no one else ever had: unwavering loyalty. She drew a shaky breath. I am not walking away. Not anymore. The silence that followed was heavy with promise. Damien's fingers curled weakly but firmly around hers. Then we start again, he whispered, not as a man claiming what is his, but as a man asking you to choose me. Clara felt her heart steady. Anchored at last, she bent down and pressed her forehead to his. Then I choose you, Damien Blackwell, even if it terrifies me. His eyes closed, a rare peace settling across his face. The days that followed were a blur of recovery and revelations. The rival corporation's leaders were arrested, their empire crumbling under the weight of the exposed evidence. Damien's name cleared his company's stock, soared, and public opinion shifted almost overnight. The same reporters who once called him a monster now hailed him as a savior of accountability. Clara watched from the sidelines, overwhelmed by how quickly the world could change its story. But in the quiet moments away from cameras and flashing headlines, there was only the two of them. She read him the newspaper each morning as he teased him about his terrible hospital food, and held his hand through sleepless nights. Each laugh, each touch, deepened the bond they had both fought so hard to deny. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by fear or loneliness. She saw a life built on the foundation of hard truths and painful beginnings, but also on choice and love. And in that vision, Damien was always there, steady beside her. One evening, as the city lights flickered beyond the hospital window, he turned to her, his voice still rough from recovery. You changed everything, Clara. I thought I was untouchable, unshakable, but you... He paused, searching for words. You reminded me I am human. You reminded me what it feels like to need someone. Clara smiled through the tears that threatened again. And you reminded me that being needed is not a burden. It is a gift. He reached for her hand, gripping it with more strength than before. Then promise me something. Whatever storms come, you will not disappear. Stay even when it is hard. Clara nodded, her voice steady for the first time. I am not going anywhere. At that moment, she realized the nightmare had shifted into something else entirely. She was no longer the assistant working late hours to pay her bills, no longer the girl haunted by her father's death. She was a woman, standing on the edge of a new beginning, hand in hand, with a man who had once terrified her and now held her heart. 1 year later, the world looked very different to Clara Evans. Gone were the late nights in a cubicle that nobody noticed. Gone were the whispers of co-workers who assumed she would never amount to anything. She stood at the edge of a grand ballroom in a gown that shimmered under crystal chandeliers, her hand entwined with Damien Blackwell's. Cameras flashed around them, but this time she did not flinch. This time she stood tall beside him because she was no longer just his assistant, no longer just the girl who had answered a wrong number. She was his partner in every sense of the word. The gala was for the launch of a foundation they had created together, a foundation named after her father, dedicated to protecting whistleblowers and exposing corruption. Speeches were made, donations poured in, and every major news outlet covered the event. But for Clara, the only moment that mattered was when Damien leaned close to whisper in her ear, his voice carrying the same deep certainty that had once frightened her. From now on, you're mine. But this time she smiled, because the words no longer sounded like a command, they sounded like a vow. After the applause faded and the ballroom began to empty, Clara slipped out to the terrace for air. The city stretched before her, alive and endless, the same city where she had once felt invisible. Now she felt seen, not because of the lights or the headlines, but because of the man who stepped onto the terrace to join her. Damien slid his arm around her waist, drawing her close. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly, his eyes searching hers. She shook her head. "Not once, even when it was terrifying. Even when I thought I hated you, I think some part of me always knew it would lead here." He kissed her forehead gently. "I was ruthless, Clara. I forced my way into your life." She met his gaze steadily. "And I let you stay. That was my choice." He smiled, and for the first time, Clara realized how rare his smiles truly were, how much they belonged only to her. Inside, music swelled again as couples danced, but on the terrace there was only the two of them. Clara rested her head against his shoulder, remembering the girl she had been a year ago, tired and small. Startled by a phone ringing in the dark, that girl could never have imagined this life, this love, this strength. She had been afraid of being seen, and now she was not afraid anymore. Damien pressed a kiss to her hair. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" he asked. She laughed softly. "An assistant who never learned how to clock out on time." He shook his head. "I see the woman who saved me, the woman who saved herself, the woman who turned my world upside down and made me want more than power." Clara's chest ached with emotion. "And I see the man who broke through my fear. The man who taught me that love can be fierce and terrifying, and still the safest place I have ever known." They stood in silence, the city humming beneath them, the future unfolding before their eyes. It would not be easy. There would always be battles, headlines, rivals waiting in the shadows. But Clara knew now that she was not facing them alone. She had chosen him, and he had chosen her, and together they had already survived storms that would have destroyed lesser bonds. The ballroom doors opened, and the board members of their new foundation stepped onto the terrace, calling them back inside for the final toast. Damien squeezed her hand, his expression warm. "Ready to face them?" he asked. Clara smiled, strength radiating from her. "With you always." Hand in hand, they walked back into the golden light of the ballroom applause, rising to greet them. Clara lifted her glass when Damien made his speech, her heart swelling as he spoke of truth, loyalty, and second chances. And when he ended by saying, "This is not just an announcement. This is a promise," she knew he was speaking not only to the crowd, but to her. As the night drew to a close and the world celebrated their victory, Clara leaned into him one last time and whispered the words she had once resisted. "From now on, I am yours too.